it's amazing the amount of detail you've actually gone into, and I think that's what gives what you're saying a lot more credibility than people just saying, well, the sun's doing this or climate change is doing this. You've clearly put a lot of research into what it is that you're presenting.
Yeah, the people who taught me what I'm doing told me from the beginning, you have to be 100% science-backed, and when they come to question, you throw them the charts, you throw them the peer-reviewed links, and there's really nothing they can say at that point because they always want to talk about the science. Well, here's the peer-reviewed science, and now what? What's next? Yeah, all the de-ice trucks have been put away for the summer. So when there was record snow, they're like, you need to wait. So there were 11 airplanes waiting out there,
Wow.
like 3 trucks.
Okay,
de-ice.
So I guess that, like you said there, there's a lot of things to talk about. So let's talk about, say, what you do as a businessman. What got you in on this field? Because I guess you cover a wide variety of topics and subjects through your research and your podcast that you put out. But I guess you come at it from a bit of an entrepreneurial kind of businessman standpoint, which gives you like a unique perspective. Because when I was listening to you, the one thing I found very plausible what you have to say is that you looked at it like, well, I'm monitoring the climate, I'm monitoring my temperature because this is my business. You know, I'm growing coffee, I'm growing my business this way. This is important. I have to look at agriculture. And then you pick to blossom from there. I mean, so how did you get into all that?
You know, just like whatever you follow in life seems to bloom out, wherever that, I guess, motivation and thought and energy goes into expands. And I've always tried to keep that travel and incorporate it into my life. I don't want to give that up. If it's my choice to live how I want to incorporate travel as well as being paid and get to see exotic places, new destinations, and then why not? You know, it's my choice. And that's the way I went with it.
So tell me about coffee. What got you the actual taste of coffee? Were you growing a particularly unique strand of coffee? Because I guess, you know, from a consumer point of view, you go into the shop, you see a bay of coffee, you see all the different varieties from different countries. They tend to be only scored on a kind of grade scale of like 1 to 6, light to strong. I mean, I guess when you are, you know, hands down on the ground, you know the difference between the very beans themselves. I mean, coffee is pretty important, obviously, world export. And where does your taste sit on the scale? What do you like?
Incredibly strong. I mean, I don't like espresso, double espresso with a drop of milk in it. And you know that when you're trying to grade the coffee beans in the Arabica side, don't ever really touch too much the Robusta stuff. That's more Vietnam. What we did, it was the Arabica side, and we were usually grading between like 85 and 93 somewhere. And then Myanmar was around between, let's say, 87 and 92, kind of right in that range. And yeah, just the way they dry them, the way they process them, does it still have the full skin on it when they let it dry out in the on the drying, you know, pans out there? They're concrete slabs that they get it out to, or do they take the skins off and wash it once, or they wash it twice? There's all kind of different things, naturals, and if I could get a single origin, so like 1 cup of coffee comes from 1 country and 1 farm. We weren't so much into that specialty grade. It was more about what you're talking about, something that a coffee roaster would buy 10, 20 tons of, and then what they would do is blend it in with, you know, 30% from Central America, 30% from Brazil, 40% from Myanmar, whatever, to make their own taste profile that might be like your 4 or 5 on their scale.
Yeah.
But they're not using 100% from one single destination. Usually, most times coffee shops, when they're coming to that scale, they're blending their own to try to get a certain flavor that you talked about. Pretty much hits the cut, just the center of the road for everybody. Because if you're starting to get into these $12, $15 cups of specialty coffee with a sliver of lemon flavor, a hint of no chocolate over here, that's such a rare crowd. You know, most people want to get in, get their morning go-go juice, and then shoot out. If you can find somebody in that maybe top 10% that really appreciates coffee, that can actually get down to it, talk about the countries, talk about the flavor profiles, and then you have a conversation. But most people are just happy to get something and then go. A 5 if they're a 6 if they have a morning meeting, a 4 if they want to start their day, you know. I don't know about you. You got coffee there. What kind are you drinking?
I've actually got a blend, I have to say. Typically, I actually tend to go for beans through my cafetiere or through my coffee machine. But I was at a bit of a bind a couple of days ago. I ran out of coffee and I was like, I'll get this Kenko mix off the side. It's pretty strong. I quite like it. I tend to go for the old two teaspoons of coffee in there. Obviously add water. But so what do you do? You tend to use a coffee machine? How do you percolate yours? Do you have like a special?
Always go with the since we have our own beans and still know people who have full beans. I always go to my local coffee shop and I take the green beans to them, and I have it roasted to the flavor profile that I like. I like mine much stronger with a little more caffeine in it. So I have them roasted exactly the way I like, and then it's full roasted beans. Then I come up with a grinder, and then we have the press and all these things that. So I like coffee. I like it something where I can make a much larger batch than just like a little cup like this, because I'll go through that in the first few minutes in the morning just to get my brain functioning, and then as I go through the day, what I do like is the way the coffee tastes after it gets a little bit older through the afternoon.
Yeah.
When you add the milk into it, it just takes on a different taste that I really like. So if you brew it, let's say 9 in the morning, by the time it comes around 2 p.m., if it's been espresso and properly brewed, not something out of a big pot, but that it's gone through a press. If you leave it in the fridge, I don't know, the flavor changes real nice where you can just put some milk in that, shake it up. I put a little honey in, milk, and then shake it until it gets frothy and ooh, delicious. And so if you brew it out in the morning, you can keep it for the whole day and then just kind of sip that as you go along through the day.
Yeah, this is the kind of conversation I kind of prefer, really, just the kind of open, free-form conversation, because I think there's something intrinsically important in terms of my learning. I like to talk through things. I like to understand. I like to understand different points of view, and really just having a free-form conversation as opposed to an interview. I think interviews tend to be a bit like, this is my set of questions, and there we go. And as soon as that's done, see you later. And I think there is something okay to that when you work in broadcasting. But I think if you with a free-form conversation, there's the option to go off track. There's the option to ask questions back to me in the same way. And I think there's something a bit more. If you're a listener to that, there's that draws you in a different way. And I think we're moving towards a new form of podcasting in general. I think that's bringing out that ability to have in-depth conversations, particularly one-to-one with people. That I think has been lacking with people lately. People are so used to sending text messages to each other, 4 or 5 messages that are already abbreviated words, and they've lost that ability to communicate. So for me, there's something really powerful about having a conversation.
Yeah, and you hit it on the head there, too, coming back for the second time, because don't give up, don't quit. That's the whole thing, is you find it, you revise it, you revamp it, and you come back and keep going at it, because it's another way to communicate and deliver a message out there, because right now the communication, you're right, between everybody is just getting more cut and more fragmented. And in the States, it's even more fragmented because they're cutting everybody by whatever political beliefs it is. And, there's 1,000 different kind of belief systems that they're wedging everybody apart in right now. And then you get into the socioeconomic there where, oh, you're rich, you're bad, oh, you got money, oh, you're bad, you live in the wrong part of town, you live in the good part of town. They're wedging everybody on money. What kind of books you want to read? They're going to wedge you on that too. Oh, you're reading this kind of book. Oh, you're way out there. Oh, you shouldn't be reading. That's too much this. Oh, we should ban these books, actually. People shouldn't even be allowed to hear these thoughts. And then if you believe in free speech, you're wedged. And if you want to, censor voices, you're wedged. But, being in the communication thing, I don't care what you say. Everybody's got a voice. And if you don't agree with it, walk away. Absolutely. Who cares what you think? If you don't agree with the message, don't try to silence the voice. Just move on until you find a message that you agree with. When you spend all the time that the Americans are doing now to try to silence voices is downright scary. Yes, this is what we saw all throughout history, right before it gets to the edge of things you don't want to really be getting into.
I guess it's that move towards fascist control. Even that word, it has connotations with itself. But that ability to take away anybody else feeling in danger of what that information could be to them. So, but then technically you've got then I hate to use the word, a police force or a control method. So that could be a bunch of individuals who just don't like a certain message, and they're going to go, well, we need to protect people, so we're going to stop people from ever hearing this message at all. And I think in many ways, you can. So what is it they're against? I mean, is it because they just don't want dissenting ideas, or they just don't want conversation to be out there because they are working on this kind of base point of view that is, they are evil, they are bad, we must stop that voice even getting out?
Yeah, my whole premise is that as we go into this grand solar minimum, the thing I talk about the most, they're going to want the line of communications cut between us, because when it really comes down to it, there are going to be food shortages on the planet. There's going to be extreme food price rises. There'll be riots because of this. There is going to be social chaos. And that's why I talk about and do my channel, so we all can get prepared. Because if we were all talking about this and we were all prepared, we wouldn't have nearly as many problems that I see anticipated because we're not talking. So imagine if you're saying, hey, there's this event happening over here. This store just got taken out. These trains are getting robbed. This is the highway banditry, this, that, and the other. They're not going to want you to share that. So I think that preemptively, because what I envision with the food shocks coming, first one will be 2021. Next heaviest food shock will be 2023-4, where it'll get really expensive and not very much around. 2028, we're in a whole different world than we understand, where food just won't be available in some places. But they're not going to want these discussions coming forward. There's too much invested in the global warming initiatives for the last 40 years. I mean, how many billions, trillions of dollars are in that whole market there, carbon, just the funding for universities, textbooks, careers based around that, more funding based on trying to prove something. If that were to suddenly be turned over and say, oops, we all made a mistake for 40 years, it is starting to cool now, they're not even going to want those discussions. Even if new science is found, they're not going to want those discussions out there and that new information brought forth, because they just lost the whole, they'll be never respected or thought of as experts in those fields again. So as we go through all these massive changes coming up, they've already started. If you haven't noticed the weather around you.
Yeah.
But I think this is part of it, is to preemptively start to say that, oh, their thoughts are bad because they're talking about fill in the blank.
Yeah, of course.
But I think the first is just to put the foot in the door to try to stop the conversation as we move down toward the food riots. And that's my personal opinion. You can agree or disagree with that. But this whole thing is a slippery slope. It's kind of the direction we're going. I don't know what you feel about it, but I personally don't think that's the way we should be going.
No,
well,
I really don't. I really don't. So I did see a premise around maybe 5 years ago, probably a little bit older, regarding, I think it was Virgin Media. I found a PDF online, and it was talking about how they were viewing how the internet will change within the next 10 years, and it's going to have a banding system, much like how cable TV works. So you'd have like access to kind of basic internet, so like Google, Wikipedia, and so on. And then if you want to access the likes of Disney websites, it'll be a little bit higher. If you want to access, alternative content, shall we say, that's probably going to be the extreme end of what you have to pay for. And you'd have to pay based on the scale. And the bandwidth that you would receive to receive information from the internet will be how much you pay. So the whole internet will be, again, like cable TV. And we've seen that kind of shutting down certainly across the Western countries. How is the internet in the other side of the world? I mean, is the speeds okay? Is there kind of censorship that's happening in the same way that's happened over here?
I'm going to say yes in the States, but in Asia, unless you're in Taiwan, or I should say in Hong Kong, these other periphery countries outside China, which China tries to control, everything is super fast, like 100 megabytes up and 100 megabytes down. Even just using my phone as a primary source, I'm still getting like 72 up and down out of a phone. And it's only on a 4G system. Everything's pretty much open and pretty free to talk about here, as long as you don't criticize government and do anything with drugs or have drug videos. You're pretty good. You can talk about anything,
I mean, it's a crazy time. I think we're going through this whole transition of just languages being forced to be changed by legislation. And it's just like, you're legislating language. Where is that going to stop? And that really worries me too.
Yeah, because we see these same things through history, and living out here. And I just want to give a very quick history lesson to anybody who's very aligned with the left over here and think that they're making progress inside their ideology, that they're climbing the ranks, that, oh, I'm going to be somebody in there. But what is happening, and if you haven't, since I lived out in China and worked there, I was very familiar with this whole rise of communism through the bourgeois area of the 1930s. Now, I want to take you back in history a little bit here. And you have to realize in the 1930s, China was on the same par level with places like Paris and New York on the fashion scene. Motion picture scene was coming up there heavily. Fashion industry. I mean, it was a very, very elegant, high-class city at the time. Equivalent with anything. Paris, Hong Kong, London, New York at that time. And it was rising up through the ranks as any of these international destinations. Japanese came in. And after Mao took over, the whole communist revolution took place. And here was the thing, and I can't impart the message enough. And I'm starting to see the same exact things that are happening in the United States of these shock brown troops, the brown shirts, using waving the little red books and coming together, using the students to control the whole political discourse and the language discourse. Because they did the same exact thing. It's like a copy-paste 2.0. First, they destroyed everything in the past, or they tried to. Then they tried to suppress all the language, and if you didn't have the right language. And then they tried to ban anything that wasn't 100% in tow with the ideology. So if you listened to the wrong music, they came and broke your records, they poured ink on your head, took you away to labor camp, etc. But here's the most fascinating thing. Like, all these kids were coming up in the ranks, and they were getting their little cadres together, and they became quite powerful, some of them. But then they were taken out because they became the threat, because they had too many followers. And then within the party, they rose up through the ranks, but then when they thought they were the hot to do, the rest of the Communist Party would look down and go, well, they have 50,000 people following. What if they decide to go off and do their own thing? They're a threat. We should eliminate them right now. So these people who thought they were the safest ended up being thrown into the camps as well because they had too large of a following.
Interesting.
Now, they used all the students in the beginning to bring up the movement and get everybody riled up and get into the movement to get it all through society. But once that happened, the cream that was rising up all just got whacked out at the camps themselves. Very important message for all of you out there who are leaning toward the communist socialist ideologies. It just never worked, and you got to go to China. And obviously, if you're really pushing that direction, you didn't read much about history, or they didn't teach you much about Mao's Cultural Revolution, and who ended up in the camps. It was the leaders and the people who were recruiting for that whole communist revolution were the ones who were thrown in the camps about a fourth of the way in through the whole thing.
Wow, that's pretty
interesting.
It's really interesting. Yeah, you suddenly hear that the student movement is the catalyst really for all this societal change, and the change in the workplaces. There's certainly a push towards that ideology within workplaces now. And then they're changing how people talk to each other in terms of interrelationship stuff, and it's quite disturbing. I think it upsets a lot of people, and I think that's where it's very much there's like a cutting edge between what is traditional, what is old, what is the way that is, and this is our way. This is a very communist, socialist kind of way, and it's disturbing how the changes are so radical. What would have to be expected? Man, I don't even know where it could end. That's what worries me, I guess, because I guess that it's taken till there is nothing, and then you end up with the opposite, which is a dictatorship rather than a community benefit, should we say?
Well, see, now you got to wrap the whole Grand Solar Minimum into this thing as well.
Okay.
When you say take, and there's loss of life, and it doesn't matter if the population declines, because the population is going to decline during the Grand Solar Minimum anyway. So if you were leaders of movements or whatever global initiatives that you want to put in forth that are led by a few families and peoples out there, you would probably try to establish a new system while the old system's crumbling anyway. Like, it's going to crumble anyway. That's the whole thing, and the reason I keep talking about the economics in the Grand Solar Minimum, because every Grand Solar Minimum, go back to the past, just say 2,300 years, 2,400 years, the food always gets too expensive. There's always overthrows of governments because they can't feed their people. And there's just general civilization crumbles, and then it reemerges on the backside.
Okay, so
But imagine during the crumbling that you could reset society into this socialist, or like this, whatever, let's say communist, because call it what it is. I'm just not even going to put the light version in there of socialism. I'm going to call it communist ideologies coming in. If you could reset the whole world, or as much as you could, to communists, then when you reemerge out of the backside, you could get everybody in the cities, equal, one bread for you, one bread for me. We're happy.
Okay, so let's talk.
I see something like this intertwining with the Grand Solar Minimum. Again, I keep saying they're going to try to ride on top of a natural cycle to get a bunch of these initiatives through, and when we come out on the other end, it'll be something quite different.
Let's go back to that, what we were talking about there. So I noticed Grand Solar Minimum. So for those people who are uninitiated to know what a Grand Solar Minimum is, do you want to give us a bit of a layman's perspective of what a solar minimum is? I mean, I know, but most people perhaps generally don't, so...
Well, let me throw the question back at you, because you saw me present at AV10, at Alternative View 10. So what did you glean from my presentation? Or now, how would you explain it? So I'm a guy who's in it all the time. And imagine if you're going to explain this to a friend of yours who's never heard of it either. Can you explain it? Well, how would you start to explain it to somebody to even get their interest piqued enough where they wouldn't turn off? Because we've been so set up with so many trigger words now, as soon as you hear it, you turn off and you're like, don't talk. And we've just been pre-programmed not only in the language with the left or these new types of terms we have to use by law, but the trigger word programming is in there too. So I could probably give you a couple trigger words like UFOs, Bigfoot, chemtrails. These are trigger words. As soon as you hear it, your conversation's pretty much over. They've already boxed you into something. The new one for me that I get a lot of time is ice age. It's not an ice age. Don't call it the wrong thing. It's a grand solar minimum, mini ice age. But see, they'll drop an ice age right on top of you. So what are you going to think? Oh, there's an ice age coming. You're going to think, those things take thousands of years. Come on, this guy's insane. It's 2 miles over ice of Chicago and New York. That thing takes how many thousands of years to manifest? And this guy's talking ice age. So they try to derail your argument right away.
Okay. So actually, I like what you did there. I actually did, because you flipped on its head quite smartly. Instead of me going, hey, just tell me about all your stuff. You're like, actually, what did you glean from this? What did you learn from this? How I learned that. One thing I did like is that I have an interest in history, mythology, culture, and how things have changed over time. And I said, when you were talking about how societies have rose and fell over those periods of time, I instantly connected it to what it is that I know. So when you talked about how when cultures that rose to a high level of degree, so shall we say like the Romans or even before that, when climate, our solar system takes over and affects our climate, shall we say, when that starts affecting agriculture, when that starts affecting people, and the governance that's in control is the one that is expected by the people to help them out, and there's nothing they can actually do because the cycle is already in effect. It's a solar system cycle that's happening, and that is affecting the climate, and that is affecting the agriculture. And when you were talking about those waves of like the different cultures appear to be on a 400-year cycle, and you gave an example via you had a graph up of when the solar cycles were coming through, and that is exactly when societies have rose and fall throughout history. And I took that and I was like, actually, that matches up really effectively. And when you see like when those those solar minimums have come up, so there's like the one from the 1600s, 1610, isn't it? Is that what the last sun's cycle major one was?
1640, yeah, that's the famous one, modern minimum. So most people in the UK would be most familiar with that one.
Yeah. So do you want to go from there then?
I don't know. We can just step back in history and then, okay, so we'll do it like this. I'll give you a time period and then you tell me about the history that you understand during that time, or what would be a common knowledge fact, I guess, of that time. So if I say 1600s, just the average person would say kings and queens, England, a lot of ships moving to other places, to the New World, and that kind of thing. That's kind of generally what people would think, right?
That's right, yeah.
Of that time period.
Yeah, because I guess that's a time where there's an exploration element going on. They want to find new trade routes to the Americas, and obviously into the Far East. They want to bring new foods in. They want to move people as well. And I guess from there you have a lot of people trying new things for the first time. So sugar, potatoes have been brought into the Western countries. So food is changing. So I guess at that time, when there's that modern minimum happening, we're kind of perhaps compensating by bringing in food for other areas. Is that how would you see that as well?
Yeah, because especially the Roman Empire, if I say 535 AD, late antique little ice age, how many people really have recollection and can actually tell me something or know something about that little era of time when it was the actual end of the decimation and Roman Empire finished? Actually, right around 400 AD was that end of that grand solar minimum. They don't even have a name for it, it's so far back. But then they started to come out, the warming started again, and then wham, they had 3 massive VEI 7 eruptions during the same couple of years. And there was so much ash on the planet, whoosh, temperatures plunged back down again. Romans couldn't feed their people. And if you look around 380 or say 350 AD, why did the Romans just try to expand so much at that time? You think they were doing it really for economic purposes? No way. They were going looking for more food grow zones, hoping they could find another place that could bring more grains in to keep the people satiated. So you see these land expansions and these kind of power plays across the planet looking for resources. Follow the timelines of those two. Because do you think that Genghis Khan just one day woke up and said, let's go invade the entire planet today? You think Zhonghua, that Zhonghua is like the Christopher Columbus of China. See, China thought another grand solar minimum was starting, so they sent him over to Africa to look for new trade routes. And guess what? They're back in Africa today. They must have known something about a cycle and returning rainfall, because Chinese are over in Africa with all their investment projects. But what's so interesting, chase back the voyages of Zhonghua, that's Zhenghe, Zhonghua. And where did they go? He was trying to get off of trading with Eastern Africa and get that whole trade route established with East Africa from India to Peshawar over to Africa, just like we see the string of pearls today. Imagine that.
So these cycles are, so every 400 years, is that their average? And it comes to peaks and troughs in those points?
Yeah, now the 400 years are the super intense ones, but in the middle there's a little light one. It's like a quick little, they're very short, 10, 15 years, and solar activity declines just enough to affect a little bit of food production. But then on the 400 years, really where you get these massive declines in population, governments, food production, climate shifting tremendously. Like we're in the beginning of this new shift right now. So this is why the weather's so tumultuous around the planet. And it's always in the beginning of the shift because everything's been stable for 400 years. And now it's getting bashed out of place. So everything's trying to collide in the atmosphere. Got new jet streams moving to new places. Oh, wait, there's already a jet stream there. Get out of the way. Well, now we got a doubling or tripling of jet streams over those areas. And we're getting these massive rainouts. Cloud bands are shifting. This beginning part of it's the most ferocious in the weather changes. So after about 10 years, it should stabilize more. But then it's just going to get cooler for a while, and then we'll come out of it. And apparently coming out of it, the weather's not as mixed up as it is going into it, because everything is kind of morphed and shifted around, and nothing's really stuck stably for centuries and centuries to move to a new pattern. It's only been there for a decade or decade and a half or two, max 20 years, and then it starts to shift out again. So that's not really locked in stone as it would be on a multi-century pattern.
Yeah, because I'm looking at your data here in your article. So this is the if you were to sign up to your website, that is oilseedcrops.org. What happens when you hit your subscribe is that you send us a PDF, and that's what I was just browsing through as we started this conversation. And I'm looking at this data for this about the variety of solar activity features that are happening, and the 11-year solar cycle as well, because I think that's what confuses some people with this as well. Is that would you agree with that?
Yeah, because how much are you hearing about the 11-year solar cycle, solar minimum right now in your news over there? Are you hearing about it a lot? Because it's in the papers quite a bit in the States about the 11-year solar minimum.
Yeah, I think over here it's generally there's a lot of the science-based TV shows do talk about it quite a lot. There's a particular scientist works for the BBC called Brian Cox, a very famous guy. On a lot of his astronomy shows, he's talking about the 11-year solar cycle. So in the last one is the solar system, he was talking about that quite a bit.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, is that like a topic that comes up quite frequently in the eastern countries, just due to the agriculture base there?
It is, but they are so deep into moon cycles anyway. So if you live over here, every single holiday that comes up is based on a lunar calendar. There's people out burning money, people going to the temples. It's very much still ingrained to follow the cycles of the moon, to follow the longer cycles within cycles. And it's still just so much part of the culture. The birth sign, we have the Virgo and whatever, Sagittarius and whatnot. Well, they have the same, animal signs, if you will, snake, rabbit, cow, pig, whatever. But they're so following, still so ingrained, and it is such a integral center part of the society and age is still understanding the planetary movements, the heavens, the cycles of the moon, and how all this is integrated. So they're very aware of the 11-year solar cycle, but they're very aware also of this larger, heavier cycle, this grand solar minimum, very aware of it now. You can see China posturing everywhere. You can see Japan up there posturing. You see what's happening in Korea, because they all have their own belief systems of the seed point of human consciousness is at the Big Dipper, according to the Beidou Qixing cult, or the cult of the Big Dipper. And it's not like a cult, like a Jonestown cult or anything. It's what they use for like a belief system, like the Taoists or something like this. But they follow a couple of different traditions out here, one being the fox. And so you got to go really far back in history to find much about the fox, 3,000 years prior, and you start to get a lot of iterations about the fox. But they're still following that same trajectory of following the stars around the heavens to see what's going to happen, because the emperor was always removed when the mandate from heaven was removed. And they even use it today, like Xi Jinping. He still talks about he has the mandate of heaven to be the ruler of China, to put himself as the new emperor in there. Yeah, they're still so focused on it. It's a center point. But, we don't even know basic astronomy back in the classes. You go to even a high schooler and ask them about the planets, they won't know what you're talking about. At least in an American school, they're so taken away from anything science based and astronomy based. It's just really, they have the most basic rudimentary levels. They won't even know how big the sun is comparatively to the earth. It's like the simplest facts we all knew by third, fourth, fifth grade back when I was growing up.
Yeah, same here. Same here. Astronomy and science actually was it's what inspired me. You know, I was inspired to look at the heavens because I was at school and my teacher would be talking to me about it and the fantastical things that are happening in space. And most of the books that I had by the time I was 8 were all astronomy based. So I had that particular, you know, inquisitiveness about the heavens because my mother was interested in school taught me. But it's true. I mean, my son does, but I guess he probably gets that more from myself. But I'm not sure anyone else does. I mean, people don't even know what the names of the planets are. That really disturbs me. And then we share our celestial neighborhood with them.